Hi, I'm Charles Galda, President of Vision New England, and your host for the Church in Action program, where we talk with New England leaders about making disciples who disadvantage themselves for unity and to do justice, which opens the door to share Jesus and transforms lives and our world. This week, I'm talking with Lucy Houghton. Lucy is Director of Care Ministries at Walnut Hill Community Church. If you don't know Walnut Hill, they have their main campus in Bethel, Connecticut, and they've got campuses in New Milford, Waterbury, and Derby. Lucy, thanks for being with us again.
Thank you for inviting me, Charles.
Now, Lucy, we just completed this exercise working with leaders across New England to identify the gaps in the post-pandemic church, what God's exposed over the last couple of years. And one of the biggest themes was mental health. Pastoral mental health, staff mental health, congregation mental health, community mental health, that therapists and counselors are completely backlogged and won't even keep waiting lists anymore. The system is clogged up and people need help. And so this is a massive area that there's a real opportunity for the church to step into. And you guys have, even before COVID, you guys were working in this direction. Can you give us a little bit of background on how Walnut Hill first saw this need, decided to engage, figured out how to engage?
I will do my best. So I've been in Walnut Hill since 2011 and got involved in doing a support group in about 2013 with some people who'd gone through trauma and loss. And this was my first sort of opening into the church. I have a professional background as a social worker, clinical social worker, working with mental health, abuse and trauma. And through conversations, I recognized that there was a huge need for mental health support within the church. And actually was employed by the church in 2018 to work on the care team. In that time, I looked at what resources do we have? How do we bridge that gap between people who are experiencing mental health and faith? Some people would receive comments along the lines of, well, if you pray harder, then the mental illness will get better. If you just have more faith, if you give your anxieties to Jesus, then your anxiety is going to go away. And these are really, really well-meaning comments, but actually left people feeling very isolated. And so I began to look at what can we do to bridge faith and the very real illness that impacts somebody's mind. The mind is just another limb of the body. So we need to be as compassionate and as supportive to those who have mental illness as we would with someone with other physical illnesses.
Are those responses that you just listed, are those ever constructive? I know they're going to be hurtful to some people. Are they ever constructive or no, never?
They can be directive in prayer. They can be helpful and actually focusing on scriptures. And scripture is always powerful. It's never demeaning. It comes with love and support. But when somebody's actually battling with mental illness, 9 times out of 10, they already know those scriptures and they're still struggling. And I think it's this place of giving a safe space for people to be able to say, I need more help. And I would really like to have a Christ-centered approach for that. And how do we bring this together? At the same time, I discovered that Kay and Rick Warren with Saddleback had actually developed fantastic resources. So it was kind of a perfect timing. This was 2018. And prior to COVID, we had no idea that was coming. But God began to stir my heart and brought together resources, conversations, and many people who are actually saying, please, can we have support?
I want to pick up on that, the Saddleback program you mentioned, but I want to go back just a minute and just cover, because it seems to me that sometimes in the church we stigmatize mental health. And so because I can't bring it up because it means I'm not being spiritual enough, because it means my prayer life isn't right. Is that isolated, or does that exist pretty broadly in your experience?
Yeah, it does. And it leaves people in a place of greater isolation because they've tried to ask for help and support, but what they've received has been somewhat placatory, and people just haven't understood. I have family members who didn't understand mental illness, and very strong faith, very compassionate people. And it wasn't until they walked through their own experience that they suddenly realized that actually someone just saying, pull yourself together, just get out of bed, it's going to be okay, wasn't enough.
Yeah, I just think about times some that I've learned myself, not with mental health, but other stuff where you're going through really difficult, painful stuff. People in your life telling you, you should do X and you should do Y, and I would do.
Yeah.
It may be well-meaning, but boy, it hurts.
Yeah. And it actually pushes people away. It puts up the wall because they feel not listened to. They feel misunderstood. And when you're exhausted, I think of people particularly struggling with anxiety or depression, bipolar, to have to explain your story time and time again, to have to try and justify. They've already been through professionals. Right. And if those simple responses worked, then praise God, but quite often they haven't. And so we're actually having to look at what happens to one's brain when there's mental illness, what happens to the changes of chemicals. So what I actually feel has been really important was educating staff and pastors so that they could have a greater understanding of what goes on when somebody is dealing with mental illness. And that's been part of my work here. I'm very fortunate to have staff and pastors who are so open to understanding more about mental illness and not wanting to stigmatize. So that was a huge open door. That was an incredible blessing to be able to work in that situation.
Now, it sounds like around 2018, you found the Saddleback program, or the Saddleback program started. I'm not sure which.
I found the resources. I think they were fairly new. I found them. I was in conversation with Adam Di Pasquale, one of our lead pastors here, and just said, I'm really wanting to look into this. And he's like, look, buy the resources. And so I got those, and they're fantastic. I don't know if anybody ever had any of the Saddleback resources before, but they come so detailed. They give you a 90-day plan, a 60-day plan, a 30-day plan of how to set up a group. I mean, it is so comprehensive. I was really impressed. What I actually chose to do was to have an oversight team. I didn't want to be the one that was making all the decisions. I wanted to be able to have conversations and diversity within a group that would actually challenge my thinking and what I thought might be the way forward. And so we would meet on a regular basis. I had a pastor, I had lay leaders, and a couple of people actually involved in mental health in their own profession. And so we would meet and we would begin to organize and pray and look at how do we do this in a church. And I'm so grateful for them because they were a huge support and they kept me accountable, and I felt that was really important.
And so I'd like to talk about how you set up the program, but before that, can you help us? What is the program? What's in place today?
Okay, so the program is 25 sessions of looking at different aspects of mental illness. The group is set up, so it's a group format. You meet once a week, hour and a half, and then it's a closed group to enable people to feel safe. The first one I actually facilitated on my own because I didn't have any other leaders, but I would encourage you to have two if you can. And we would work through different sessions. What I would say at this point is that the group is designed, the materials are designed for people experiencing mental illness. But the needs within our church at the time were actually for what I call caregivers. They are the people who have a loved one, whether that's an adult child or a teenager, possibly a parent, or they've grown up with their parents with mental illness, or a sibling or a spouse. And although technically the group is for those with mental illness, what we looked at was, could we use the resources to support those who are caring and actually struggling with their own issues because of what is going on in the family? And we chose to do that as a first group, as a pilot group, and use the resources. The resources were extremely adaptable and actually applied to whether you were a caregiver or you were actually walking through your own mental illness at the time. Quite a lot of the people I worked with were struggling with some of their own anxieties and really days where they felt quite depressed, if not suffering with depression at times. So I just wanted to put that as a preface to what we did. We have also done a group for people experiencing mental illness.
Okay. And was it in recommending to other people, would you say you should start with those affected by mental illness or caring for people with mental illness before, or does it not really matter?
I don't think it matters. Saddleback might say something slightly different, but what I found was I looked at the needs within the church. And because, so for example, one of the sessions is talking about boundaries. Well, many parents who have an adult child with mental illness, there's a huge struggle with having boundaries within the family. Quite a lot of times there is guilt. There is a sense that your child has mental illness, so maybe you've done something wrong. And these begin to create poor boundaries. And so one of the sessions we began to look at, what does it look like to have healthy boundaries within the relationship so that you as caregivers can actually not just survive, but begin to thrive again, to find your own identity as parents or as a sibling. And so a lot of the materials were quite transferable.
And so I heard 25 weeks, 90 minutes a week, closed group of how big?
So the largest I had was 10.
Okay.
I would not recommend going over that. And even 10 was quite a lot, because what you want to do is to give ample space for each person to share.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
And I was going to say so the program for each week has questions and discussion points. It has scripture. It has, I don't know if you can see this, but it has a great journal. It's called the Journey Towards Hope. And each person buys that and we work through it. And it has quotes, scriptures, words of encouragement, space to journal and write your own things, and then bring that to group sessions and share from that if one would choose to. So there's a lot to cover.
I hear in that 90 minutes, it doesn't sound like it's an instructional session, although there might be some instruction. It sounds more about it's engaging with each other and hearing from each other. Is that fair?
Yeah, it's definitely a safe space where people can feel understood, where they're not having to explain the why and justify why their day has been like that. They can just come and be, and almost creating a quiet space. Sometimes there's moments of reflection.
And it sounds like there's homework, if I can call it that, between sessions, and that's my journal.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm doing my journal work during the week, and that's preparing me for the next session of helping me think about things and reflect on things. So I'm prepared to share it if I want to, or I have to.
No, if you want to. This is about personal choice and space. This is about feeling safe. Some people are naturally just very quiet and introverted, and they just enjoy that they can hear somebody else sharing an experience they can relate to. What I discovered was this was the only space for many who actually had that. And it was the only space, unless they had a Christian therapist, it was the only space where they heard Jesus being brought into their mental illness. I think for a lot of people, it's a separation. This is my mental illness and this is my faith. Well, what does it look like if we merge those together? If Christ is in the center, he's created us with body, soul, and spirit. And so he's going to weave his way. He's going to bring healing, and he's at the center of it.
And so now you mentioned you're a clinician. You've got actual training, which most of us wouldn't have. Is that necessary to implement the program, or is it generally done without a clinician that just happens to be your background?
It's designed by Saddleback that anybody could lead it.
Okay.
What I would say, just from personal experience of working, facilitating the groups and setting them up, is that if you don't have a background in or knowledge or experience in mental illness, I would connect with a local Christian counseling service. I think one of the keys to this is actually, what are your local resources? Mm-hmm. Do you know who to contact if there is a mental health crisis? If you've got those numbers available. So you need to equip yourself. You need to do a little bit of education. But one of the things that you could do is reach out to a local Christian counselor and say, look, this is what I'm thinking of doing. Would you be prepared to just meet with me a couple of times? As a professional clinician, we have what's called supervision. It keeps us safe. Yeah. It checks in on our practice. And so I would just encourage, if you're leading a group like this, to have somebody you could just check in with a couple of times during the group, the length of the group, maybe one before, one in the middle, and one after, once you've finished. Because if things might get triggered in yourself.
Yeah.
And just have that safe space to say, this has come up and it's confidential to be able to share.
Now, is it the kind of program that it doesn't matter what your mental illness is, you belong here? Because it would seem that could be a pretty broad group.
Yeah. So because of my awareness of what some people are experiencing, our initial group that was for people with mental illness, we actually focused on depression and anxiety. Okay. This group was developed in 2021, and I actually had a good friend of mine and one of my ministry leaders, Chris Barrett, lead that group. He does have a background in counselling. And what we decided to do in consultation with the Christian Counselling Centre was actually develop that for people who were coming through COVID and were struggling with anxiety, because we knew that was a huge need. So that, again, that was our personal choice, that was our observation, and that's what we saw as what the needs were at the time. Yeah.
Now, I would be concerned if I were doing this program, I would be concerned that there may be some people coming through the door who need a lot more help than I can give them. And they need somebody like you or a psychiatrist. Is there equipping in this for me to be able to figure out I can help in this program can help in these circumstances? When I see somebody who fits this profile, they need more than I can do.
They've got a great booklet actually that that talks about all the different types of mental illness. It's not a diagnostic book, obviously, but it would give you support and understanding of what you might see with people who are experiencing different types of mental illness. The key thing I find is connecting with your local services, so that if you feel that somebody is really struggling and they don't have a counsellor or a psychiatrist, that you can suggest to them, this group is not going to be enough for you. This is part of your recovery. This is part of getting better. And we would suggest you go and find professional support. Most of the families and individuals that I work with, they already have counsellors. They already have a team of professionals around them, because they are, experiencing quite significant mental illness.
And you just made me think of something that I hadn't thought of before, but I'm going to imagine some people will hear this and they'll be triggered for them too. Is, okay, well, what about legal liability? Is this all covered under your normal church insurance that tends to cover some level of counseling too?
I think that's a good conversation to have with your lead pastor, and for them to talk to their legal team. Okay. And just because in the parameters of the group, you're not getting into any clinical advice. This is, I think you just mentioned it before, this isn't instructional. And in actual fact, Saddleback is very clear and has good guidelines and boundaries around, this isn't even about people within the group trying to fix one another and give advice to one another. It's very easy to say, oh, if you tried such and such a medication, or if you've been to this therapist. And so as a leader, it's very important to actually set up that boundary of, we are not here to fix one another. We're not here to give advice. We're actually here to just be a safe space so that you can share. And I would suggest being very clear of what your policy is at your church for suicide awareness. So if somebody discloses that they're suicidal, follow that policy. Make sure that they are connected with, a 911 call or with the National Suicide Hotline, so that you have to be aware.
And it sounds like it's worthwhile to at least check in with your church insurance agent to make sure, right, having a conversation like that, which most insurance companies who do churches would be able to help with too. But just to make sure that you've got the right coverage for something like this and don't need anything special. So you mentioned boundaries as something that's covered in 1 week. Could you give us just some other examples of topics that are covered?
Yeah, grief is covered. And grief, as you know, isn't just about losing someone. Grief can be the loss of experience. I think of all the milestones that go on through life, particularly from teenage to late 20s. And it's not always, but quite often in that stage where one might experience mental illness. That isn't always the case, but when it does happen, there's a lot of grieving. You're not hitting the milestones necessarily that your peers are. Graduations, college, the career that you'd hoped and dreamed to have. Everything might have gone on hold while you're in treatment, or you're actually just having to pause. And whether it's working with parents or working with somebody who has mental illness, that can be devastating. So we look at, well, what does that feel like? Are you angry? Are you angry with God? How do you actually process that, and how do you begin to heal and understand? So I do a lot around grief process, understanding emotions, anger. What does it look like to have joy? Will you have joy again? How do you cope, and how do you have peace when the circumstances aren't changing? What do the promises of God look like when your life is in crisis? I love that. I love that we can explore the reality of God's word in the mix of really difficult times. And how do we have faith in that process?
Now, you've done at least 2 groups. I don't know if you've done more than that at this point, but you mentioned 2, so I know you've done at least 2. Can you share I don't want to do anything for prurient interest because I want to respect people's privacy, but just for somebody who's listening, trying to figure this out, could you share a little about what maybe somebody coming in the door was dealing with, what they experienced and what the outcome was after the course?
Yeah, so I actually reached out to a couple of people and said, do you mind sharing with me some specifics? And one woman who came to the group who has mental illness, she had had professionals in her life and a therapist, but what she experienced that was powerful for her was the level of understanding and the compassion. The compassion from one another in the group and the leader. And that actually enabled her to really get in touch with the compassion that God had for her. And that was quite changing for her. She knew all the kind of the professional way of doing things. She knew what she was meant to do, and she was following that through and doing the right things. But actually, how do you bring Jesus into that? How do you hear God when your mind is racing with thoughts all the time, and when you're going through high levels of stress? And so, sorry, I've just got a couple of notes that she gave me, and she said it was really helpful just having a mix of people with different experiences. Having a place to be able to hear from them as well, but also contribute. I think a lot of people with mental illness and in these situations feel they've got nothing to offer. And that's not true. Everybody has something to offer. God has a purpose for each person's life. And illness, that they weren't just being told to have more faith, but we were actually willing to create a group and acknowledge and try to break down the stigmatism. So that was from one person. and they felt that they grew in their faith, and they just experienced incredible compassion.
Is this? I'm glad you said that. So is this for something that people at your church can participate in, or is this something that you also view as something you use to serve your community?
So I've had both. It's definitely been something within the church. It's very upfront about faith. So if you are not a believer and don't want a Jesus-centered approach to this, then it wouldn't be for you. But more recently, I had someone get in touch with me who had heard about the group that I had done for caregivers. And in a very, very roundabout way, with some people, 4 hours away, they actually learned about what I was doing and asked for support. And I began to meet with them actually on a one-to-one.
And so we're called to do justice, and engaging in this field is absolutely doing justice. And that is something that then is something that helped the woman you shared grow in her faith. But then presumably it's also bringing some people who may be skeptics or neutral, maybe not hostile to faith, but it sounds like it's a way to not just do justice in our community, which you're called to do, but also outreach and help people discover Jesus even.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And so what kind of infrastructure? We talked a little about how you have a background already. You've got the Saddleback program. Is there a cost associated with the Saddleback program?
I think it was such a reasonable price. I think it was about $70. And what you get for that, I mean, you get an entire sort of program of detail of how to set it up. If you've never done a group before, this will give you everything you need to know how to do it. And we'll walk you through step at a time.
I think that's a really important point, because it's not the kind of thing where, hey, they did this and they're willing to share their stuff with you. They've actually taken what they did and bundled it up as a kind of cookbook approach for churches who don't have experience to be able to implement it. And so now, Lucy, you're a big church. And so or I should say you're at a big church. Is it only something that a big church could implement, or could small churches do this too? At $70.
Absolutely. I think any church can. If there is a heart and a passion, if there is a recognition that this is needed, that this will help break down stigmatism, that this will support their congregation and community, absolutely. I don't feel this needs to be a big church event. And also because ultimately you need one or two leaders, you need the support of your leadership and their prayer cover. And then those who are willing to come within the package as well. You have you're able to just download all of the promotion kind of materials. You're not having to create anything. I mean, it's an incredible blessing. They just give it all to you. There's a DVD, there's a CD, there are different booklets. Things are so well laid out. So yeah, I would say any church could pick this up and run with it.
So two minutes left. If I'm listening to this and I say, I would love to get connected to Saddleback, Jess will put it on our website, but if they wanted to connect more directly, how would they find it? And in other words, how would they find you?
I would love to just walk alongside anybody who wants to run this program, who wants to support, just needs a conversation, needs a sounding board. They can contact me at Walnut Hill. I trust Jess is going to put a telephone number and my email, and all I say is please reach out. I would just really enjoy to walk with you on this. It's an incredible kind of space to be in, and it's groundbreaking, and it's really needed.
And so if you can't find Lucy at walnuthillcc.org, let us know and we'll get you connected to Lucy. Thanks for that generosity too, Lucy, and that support for people. And if I'm in an area where there's a Walnut Hill campus, Waterbury, New Milford, Bethel, the Valley, how can I get into the program?
Contact the church or care@walnuthillcc.org, and that will land in my email box and I will respond to you.
That's terrific. Thanks. Thanks for this ministry, Lucy, but thank you for sharing it with us and helping us uncover the resources and understand the problem a little bit better. Thanks so much. We'll be talking with other people about the Saddleback program because it just sounds like there's so much good stuff in it, and we know folks are looking for resources. So thanks again.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
I'd like to thank Jessica Mangano, our producer. I'd like to thank our listeners and hope this discussion helps us be the people of God who do the work of God in our communities to transform the world. Visit us at visionnewengland.org for past episodes, other resources, and to click on Donate to partner with us to accelerate evangelism in New England. Our program is brought to you by our friends at the Luis Palau Association, who are dedicated to proclaiming the good news, uniting the church, and impacting cities worldwide.